Help! There's a cockroach! Amara Jones's scream tore through the Caldwell mansion's marble halls, her voice a sharp cry of panic as she fled from a scuttling pest. Her radiant brown skin flushed with terror, the kind-hearted maid burst into the one place she never should. Billionaire Ethan Caldwell's private bathroom. There he stood, towel-clad, his green eyes frozen in shock as their worlds collided in a single electric moment. The air hummed with tension, her fear sparking his curiosity, igniting a forbidden love that defies all rules. This isn't just a tale of chance. It's a saga where hidden truths unravel and hearts dare to challenge society's chains. Their journey will leave you captivated, eager to see how one fleeting moment reshapes destinies. Subscribe to dive deeper and share in the comments where you're watching from and when. Let's discover if love triumphs. The Caldwell mansion gleamed like a jewel under the morning sun, its marble facade catching the light in a cascade of brilliance. Towering columns flanked the entrance, and ivy clung to the walls, whispering of old money and timeless power. Inside, crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prisms across polished mahogany floors. The air carried the faint scent of lavender polish and wealth, an intoxicating blend that reminded all who entered of their place in the world. For most, this was a realm of untouchable luxury, a dream beyond reach. For Amara Jones, it was just another day at work. Amara, 28, moved through the mansion's library with the quiet grace of someone who knew invisibility was her shield. Her radiant brown skin glowed under the soft light filtering through stained glass windows, and her long, glossy black hair was swept into a low bun, secured with a delicate silver clip that caught the occasional glint. She was beautiful, though she never seemed to notice, her focus fixed on the task at hand. Her simple maid's uniform, crisp and gray, hugged her slender frame, but it was her gentle demeanor that truly set her apart. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, moved deftly as she dusted the leather-bound books lining the shelves, each one worth more than her monthly wages. She hummed softly, a melody from her childhood in a small southern town, where she learned to find joy in small things, helping her neighbors, sharing what little she had. That morning, she'd slipped half her sandwich to old Tom, the gardener, who'd skipped breakfast to tend the roses. She'd done it quietly, as always, unaware that Ethan Caldwell, the mansion's owner, had paused in the hallway, watching her kindness unfold. Ethan, 35, was a vision of effortless charm, tall with dark brown hair that fell in soft waves and piercing green eyes that seemed to see through walls. A billionaire by trade, he was known for his sharp mind and sharper wit, but it was his secret visits to the local orphanage that revealed his heart. He'd seen Amara's gesture, and something about it lingered in his mind like a half-forgotten song. Now, as Amara worked alone in the library, her thoughts were on her family back home. She sent every spare dollar to her mother and younger siblings, dreaming of the day she could bring them to the city. Her focus was absolute, until a skittering movement broke her reverie. A cockroach, fat and gleaming, darted across the floor, its spindly legs a blur. Amara's heart lurched into her throat. She hated bugs, especially ones that moved like they owned the place. A sharp gasp escaped her lips, and the duster slipped from her hand, clattering against the hardwood. "No, no, no!" she squeaked, stumbling backward. The cockroach scuttled toward a bookshelf, its antenna twitching mockingly. Instinct took over. Amara bolted, her polished shoes slipping on the floor as she fled toward the nearest door. She didn't think, didn't look, just pushed through, slamming it shut behind her. Her chest heaved, her pulse hammering in her ears. Safe. She was safe, or so she thought. The air was warm, thick with the scent of sandalwood soap and steam. Amara froze, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the room she'd stumbled into. Marble tiles gleamed underfoot, and a massive glass shower stood in the corner, still fogged from recent use. This wasn't the hallway. This was a bathroom. The bathroom. Her stomach dropped as she realized her mistake. Before she could turn, a low, amused voice cut through the haze. "Afraid of something, Miss Jones?" Amara's head snapped up, and her breath caught like a bird in a cage. There, standing by the sink, was Ethan Caldwell. He was shirtless, a white towel slung low around his hips, the only barrier to his modesty. Droplets of water clung to his chiseled torso, tracing paths down his sculpted abs. His dark hair was damp, curling slightly at the ends, and his green eyes sparkled with a mix of surprise and mischief. He leaned casually against the counter, one eyebrow arched as if her intrusion was the most entertaining thing he'd seen all week. Amara's face burned, her skin prickling with embarrassment. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. She took a step back, her hands flailing for the door handle, but her feet betrayed her, tangling in her panic. She stumbled forward, and in a heartbeat, she was falling, straight into Ethan's arms. His reflexes were quick, his strong hands catching her waist, steadying her against his bare chest. For a moment the world stopped. The heat of his skin seared through her uniform, and the steady thud of his heartbeat echoed against her cheek. Amara's hands pressed against his chest, her fingers trembling as they grazed the taut muscle. She could feel the droplets of water from his hair dripping onto her neck, each one a tiny shock to her senses. Her breath came in shallow bursts, her mind screaming at her to pull away, but her body refused to obey. Ethan's grip tightened briefly, his fingers warm against her waist. He looked down at her, his lips curving into a faint, teasing smile. "A cockroach, was it?" His voice was low, rich with amusement, vibrating through his chest. "I didn't think anything could scare you, Amara." Her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine, and she dared to meet his gaze. Up close, Ethan was devastating, his jaw sharp as a blade, his eyes like a storm at sea. She was painfully aware of how close they were, how his towel seemed precariously loose. Her cheeks flamed hotter, and she pushed against him, desperate to escape the pull of his presence. I I didn't mean to. It was an accident," she blurted, finally breaking free. She stumbled back, her hands smoothing her apron as if it could restore her dignity. Ethan crossed his arms, his smile widening as he watched her flustered retreat. "You make quite an entrance," he said, his tone light but laced with something deeper, something that made her heart skip. "Most people knock." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Caldwell," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the tiles. I'll go." She turned, fumbling for the door, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp the handle. She fled, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the steam-filled room. He stood there for a moment, his smile fading into something more thoughtful. The memory of her warmth against him lingered, as did the image of her earlier kindness to old Tom. Amara Jones was no ordinary maid. She was a puzzle, one he suddenly wanted to solve. His gaze drifted to the mirror, where his reflection stared back, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "Well," he murmured to himself, "this just got interesting." Outside, Amara hurried down the corridor, her heart pounding as if she'd run a mile. Her cheeks burned with shame, her mind replaying the feel of Ethan's arms, the teasing glint in his eyes. "Stupid, stupid," she muttered, pressing her hands to her face. She was supposed to be invisible, a shadow in this grand house, not a woman crashing into her billionaire employer's bathroom. But as she reached the servants' quarters, a new worry gnawed at her. She'd overheard Ethan on the phone earlier, his voice low and secretive, mentioning something about the orphanage, a promise he had to keep. What was he hiding? And why did the thought of it make her heart race almost as much as his touch? The mansion, with all its opulence, felt heavier now, as if the walls themselves knew a storm was brewing. Amara clutched her silver hair clip, grounding herself in its familiar weight. She had no business wondering about Ethan Caldwell's secrets, or his arms. But as she slipped into the kitchen to finish her duties, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just shifted, and there was no going back. The Caldwell mansion shimmered in the late afternoon light, its grandeur a silent reminder of the chasm between those who owned it and those who served within its walls. Amara Jones moved through the grand parlor with practiced efficiency, her polished shoes whispering against the gleaming oak floors. Her radiant brown skin caught the soft glow of the chandelier above, and her long black hair, neatly tucked into a low bun with that delicate silver clip, swayed slightly as she worked. She was a vision of quiet grace, her gentle nature woven into every careful motion as she polished the intricate gold trim of a mirror. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying the mortifying moment from the day before. Crashing into Ethan Caldwell's bathroom, his bare chest against hers, his teasing voice echoing in her ears. Her cheeks warmed at the memory and she shook her head, willing herself to focus. She was a maid, nothing more. Her place was to be unseen, her heart firmly locked away. Amara's thoughts drifted to her family, to the small house in Georgia where her mother and siblings waited for her monthly checks. This job, grueling as it was, meant their survival. She couldn't afford distractions, especially not ones with piercing green eyes and a smile that unraveled her composure. As she adjusted a vase of white lilies, she noticed Clara, a new maid, struggling to fold napkins for the evening's dinner service. The young woman's hands trembled, her face flushed with frustration. Without a second thought, Amara set down her cloth and approached. "Here," she said softly, her voice warm as she guided Clara's fingers. "Fold the corner like this, then tuck it under. It's easier than it looks." Clara's eyes brightened with gratitude, and Amara smiled, oblivious to the figure watching from the doorway. Ethan Caldwell stood there, his tall frame leaning casually against the frame, his dark brown hair catching the light. He wore a tailored navy suit, but his tie was loosened, a hint of the relaxed man beneath the billionaire's polish. He'd been passing by on his way to a meeting when he caught sight of Amara's quiet act of kindness. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed her selflessness. Yesterday's sandwich shared with old Tom still lingered in his mind. But this small gesture, so natural and unassuming, stirred something deeper. Her gentleness was a stark contrast to the calculated charm of the women in his world, and it drew him like a moth to a flame. He cleared his throat, stepping into the room. "Miss Jones," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying that effortless authority that made the air feel heavier. Amara's head snapped up, her heart lurching. She straightened, her hands smoothing her apron as if it could shield her from his gaze. "Mr. Caldwell," she replied, her tone polite but guarded, her eyes fixed on the floor. Clara, sensing the tension, mumbled an excuse and scurried away, leaving them alone. Ethan crossed the room, his polished shoes clicking against the wood. "You're good with people," he observed, stopping a few feet away. His green eyes studied her, catching the faint flush creeping up her neck. Not everyone would take the time to help like that. Amara's fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand, her pulse quickening. "It's nothing, sir," she said softly. "Just doing what's right." She dared a glance at him, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath hitch. He was too close, too real, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud ready to burst. He tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "You're modest, Amara. It's, refreshing." Her name rolled off his tongue with an ease that felt dangerous, intimate. She swallowed hard, stepping back to put distance between them. "I should get back to work, sir," she murmured, turning toward the mirror, her hands trembling as she resumed polishing. But Ethan didn't move. He watched her, his expression unreadable, though a flicker of curiosity danced in his eyes. "Where are you from, Amara?" he asked, his tone softer now, almost personal. "You don't talk like you're from the city." Her heart stuttered. Why was he asking? Why did he care? "Georgia, sir," she answered, keeping her eyes on her work. "A small town. Nothing like this." She gestured vaguely at the opulent room, her voice tinged with a mix of pride and humility. Ethan nodded as if piecing together a puzzle. "Must be a long way from home," he said, his voice carrying a warmth that made her chest ache. "Do you miss it?" Before she could answer, a sharp voice cut through the room. "Amara!" Mrs. Hargrove, the head housekeeper, stood in the doorway, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. Her eyes darted between Amara and Ethan, narrowing with suspicion. "You're needed in the kitchen, now!" The words were clipped, laced with a warning. Amara's stomach twisted, her cheeks burning under the older woman's scrutiny. "Yes, ma'am," she said quickly, bobbing a curtsy to Ethan before hurrying toward the door. But Mrs. Hargrove wasn't done. As Amara passed, the housekeeper leaned in, her voice a harsh whisper. "Know your place, girl. You're here to clean, not to chat with the master." The words stung, a reminder of the invisible line Amara had nearly crossed. She nodded, her throat tight, and slipped into the hallway, her heart pounding. She didn't see Ethan's jaw clench, didn't hear the low, controlled edge in his voice as he addressed Mrs. Hargrove. "She was doing her job," he said coolly, his tone leaving no room for argument, "and she's free to speak to whomever she pleases." Amara fled to the kitchen, her mind a whirlwind. The memory of Ethan's voice, his questions, his gaze, it was too much. She busied herself scrubbing pots, her hands moving furiously as if she could wash away the warmth his words had sparked. He was her employer, a billionaire whose world was galaxies apart from hers. She had no business feeling anything. Yet the way he'd looked at her, the way he'd said her name, lingered like a melody she couldn't unhear. Unbeknownst to her, Ethan remained in the parlor, his fingers tracing the edge of a table as he stared at the spot where she'd stood. Her humility, her kindness, it was disarming, a quiet force that chipped away at the walls he'd built around himself. He thought of the orphanage, of the children who lit up when he visited, and how Amara's warmth reminded him of the hope he tried to give them. But there was something else, too. A letter he'd tucked away in the library, a promise tied to the orphanage that he couldn't yet share. It was a secret that weighed on him, and somehow Amara's presence made it feel heavier. As Amara worked in the kitchen, she found a crumpled note on the counter, likely dropped by one of the staff. It was a reminder for Ethan's next visit to the orphanage, but scrawled in the margin was a cryptic phrase: "The gift must be given soon." Her brow furrowed, curiosity battling with caution. What gift? And why did it feel like Ethan was hiding something bigger than himself? She tucked the note away, her heart racing with questions she wasn't sure she should ask. The mansion's walls seemed to close in, their opulence a stark reminder of the divide between her and Ethan. Yet, as she scrubbed and polished, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Ethan Caldwell had seen her, not just as a maid, but as a person, and that, she feared, was more dangerous than any cockroach. The Caldwell mansion stood resolute against the gathering storm, its marble walls glowing faintly under the bruised gray sky. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl that mirrored the unease coiling in Amara Jones's chest. She moved through the servants' quarters, her radiant brown skin catching the dim light of a flickering sconce. Her long black hair, swept into its usual low bun and adorned with a delicate silver clip, gleamed softly as she adjusted her apron. The day had been long, filled with the usual tasks, polishing silver, scrubbing floors, but it was the weight of Ethan Caldwell's gaze, his voice that lingered like a shadow. The memory of their encounter in the parlor, his unexpected warmth, and Mrs. Hargrove's sharp reprimand haunted her. She was a maid, nothing more, she told herself. Yet her heart betrayed her, racing at the thought of him. Amara's kindness, as natural as breathing, had surfaced again that afternoon. She'd slipped into the servants' storage room to fetch cleaning supplies when she overheard Mary, a frail scullery maid, coughing weakly in the corner. Mary had been unwell for days, shivering in her thin uniform. Without hesitation, Amara retrieved a worn blanket from the linen closet, one she'd meant to mend for herself, and draped it over Mary's shoulders. "Keep it," she whispered, her voice gentle. "You need it more." Mary's grateful tears were payment enough, but Amara didn't notice Ethan pausing outside the room, his green eyes catching the quiet act. He'd been on his way to the garage, but the sight of her selflessness stopped him cold. Her compassion, so unassuming, stirred something in him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Now, as night fell, the storm unleashed its fury. Rain lashed the mansion's windows, and a sudden crack of lightning plunged the house into darkness. The power flickered, then died, leaving only the howl of the wind and the drumming of rain. Amara's breath caught, her old fear of the dark clawing at her chest. She fumbled for the small lantern on her bedside table, its weak glow barely cutting through the gloom. The mansion felt like a living thing, its corridors stretching endlessly in the shadows. She couldn't stay in her room, not with the darkness pressing in. Clutching the lantern, she slipped into the hallway, her slippers silent on the cold marble. She needed candles, matches, anything to keep the shadows at bay. The corridor was a maze of flickering shapes, the storm's roar muffling her steps. Amara's heart pounded, her lantern casting jittery light on the walls. She was halfway to the kitchen when a low voice sliced through the darkness, stopping her in her tracks. Amara! Her name, spoken with a quiet intensity, sent a shiver down her spine. She turned slowly, her lantern trembling in her grip. There, emerging from the shadows, was Ethan Caldwell. He wore a loose black shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, his dark hair damp as if he'd been caught in the rain. The faint glow of her lantern caught the sharp angles of his jaw, the intensity in his green eyes. He looked less like the untouchable billionaire, and more like a man carved from the storm itself. Mr. Caldwell, she stammered, her voice barely audible over the thunder. Her cheeks flushed, the memory of their last encounter, his warmth, his questions, flooding back. She gripped the lantern tighter, its light dancing between them. I was just going to the kitchen. The lights. She trailed off, her words faltering under his gaze. He stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow hallway. You're trembling, he said, his voice low, almost tender, but laced with something heavier. Are you afraid of the storm? His eyes searched hers and she felt exposed, as if he could see the fear she tried to hide. Not just of the dark, but of him, of the way he made her feel. She shook her head, her voice small. The dark, sir, I've never liked it. The admission felt like a confession, vulnerable and raw. She lowered her gaze, her lantern casting shadows across his chest. Ethan's expression softened, a flicker of something, concern perhaps, crossing his face. He reached out, his hand brushing hers as he steadied the lantern. The contact was brief, electric, sending a jolt through her. Don't be afraid, he said, his voice a quiet anchor in the chaos of the storm. I'm here. Her breath caught, her heart hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it. The air between them thickened, charged with an unspoken tension. She wanted to pull away, to run back to the safety of her room, but his presence held her captive. Why do you keep doing this? She whispered, her voice trembling. Why do you keep seeing me? Ethan's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. Because you make it impossible not to, he said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Every time I see you, helping Mary, sharing your food with Tom, you're different, real. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Amara's pulse raced, her mind screaming at her to flee, but her feet refused to move. Mr. Caldwell, she started, but he cut her off, his voice softer now, almost a plea. Ethan, call me Ethan. The request was intimate, dangerous, a breach of the invisible wall between them. Her lips parted, but no words came. The storm roared outside, a crack of thunder shaking the walls, and for a moment they were the only two people in the world. Then, as if fighting himself, Ethan stepped back, his hands clenching at his sides. You should go, he said, his voice strained. Get your candles. Stay safe. But his eyes betrayed him, burning with a longing that mirrored her own. Amara nodded, her throat tight, and turned, hurrying down the corridor. Her lantern's light bobbed wildly, but it was his gaze that felt like a weight on her back. She reached the kitchen, her hands shaking as she rummaged for matches. Her mind was a storm of its own. Ethan's touch, his words, the way he'd looked at her. She was just a maid, a nobody in his world of wealth and power. Yet he'd seen her, not just as a servant, but as a woman. The thought was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. As she lit a candle, her eyes caught a glint of something on the counter. A small wooden box, intricately carved, left carelessly by one of the staff. It was the same box she'd seen Ethan bring back from the orphanage, the one he'd hidden when he noticed her watching. Curiosity tugged at her, but she pushed it aside. Whatever secrets Ethan Caldwell kept, they weren't hers to uncover. Not yet. Amara clutched her candle and hurried back to her room, the storm's fury echoing her racing heart. The mansion, with its endless corridors and hidden truths, felt alive with possibility and danger. She didn't know what Ethan's secrets meant or why his presence set her soul ablaze. But one thing was certain. The darkness she feared wasn't just in the storm. It was in the pull between them, a force she wasn't sure she could resist. The Caldwell mansion glowed under the golden light of 100 candles, transforming its grand ballroom into a stage for opulence. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, their reflections dancing across polished marble floors. The air hummed with the clink of champagne flutes and the murmur of high society, gathered for Ethan Caldwell's annual charity gala to benefit the local orphanage. Amara Jones moved through the crowd like a shadow, her radiant brown skin catching the warm glow, her long black hair neatly tucked into a low bun, with that delicate silver clip glinting subtly. Her maid's uniform was crisp, but her gentle demeanor shone brighter, a quiet grace that set her apart from the glittering guests. She balanced a tray of crystal wine glasses, her hands steady despite the storm of nerves within her. Ethan's presence loomed in her mind, his touch in the darkened hallway, his voice calling her name, the way he'd seen her. She pushed the thoughts away, focusing on her duties. She was invisible here, or so she told herself. Earlier that evening, Amara had been in the servants' quarters, preparing for the gala, when she'd noticed Lily, a young girl from the orphanage, lingering nervously near the staff entrance. The child, no older than 10, clutched a tattered doll, her eyes wide with awe at the mansion's grandeur. Amara knelt beside her, offering a warm smile. "You look scared, sweetheart," she said softly, slipping her own silver hair clip from her bun and pinning it gently in Lily's hair. "This'll keep you brave tonight." Lily's face lit up, her small hand touching the clip as if it were a treasure. Amara didn't see Ethan standing nearby, watching from the corridor, his green eyes softening at her kindness. The gesture, so selfless, stirred something deep within him, a longing he couldn't name. Now as Amara wove through the gala, her tray glinted under the candlelight. The guests draped in silks and diamonds barely noticed her, their laughter ringing hollow against the cause they claimed to support. She kept her head down, her heart still racing from the memory of Ethan's words in the storm. "You make it impossible not to." She couldn't afford to dwell on him, not here, not now. But as she passed a group of men in tailored suits, one of them, a portly businessman with a sneer, reached for a glass. His hand brushed hers, lingering too long, and his voice dripped with disdain. "Careful, girl," he slurred, his eyes raking over her. "You don't belong here, do you?" Amara froze, her cheeks burning as the man's companions chuckled. The word girl cut like a blade, laced with a venom she knew too well. Her hands trembled and a glass tipped, red wine splashing across the man's pristine white shirt. The room seemed to hush, heads turning as the man's face twisted in fury. "You clumsy fool," he bellowed, stepping toward her. "Do you know how much this shirt costs? More than you'll ever see." His words were a whip, each one laced with prejudice, and Amara's heart sank, her eyes fixed on the floor as she stammered an apology. Before she could retreat, a shadow loomed beside her. Ethan Caldwell stepped forward, his presence commanding the room into silence. His navy suit hugged his broad shoulders, his dark hair catching the light, but it was the steel in his green eyes that held the crowd captive. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. "You'll apologize to Miss Jones. Now." The businessman scoffed, but Ethan's gaze didn't waver, his authority absolute. "Or you can leave my house." The man's bravado crumbled under Ethan's stare. He muttered a grudging apology, his face red with humiliation, and slunk away, his companions trailing behind. The guests resumed their chatter, but Amara felt the weight of their glances, her hands shaking as she clutched the tray. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle now, meant only for her. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes, her throat tight with gratitude and embarrassment. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," she whispered, before slipping away to the edge of the room, her heart pounding. Later, as the gala wound down, Amara escaped to the garden, the cool night air a balm against her burning cheeks. The stars glittered above, and the scent of jasmine hung heavy. She sank onto a stone bench, her hands covering her face as tears welled up. The businessman's words echoed in her mind, a cruel reminder of her place in this world. She was a maid, nothing more, a truth she'd clung to, yet Ethan's defense had shaken her resolve. Why did he care? Why did he see her when no one else did? Footsteps crunched on the gravel, and she looked up to find Ethan standing before her, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, his voice low, carrying a warmth that made her heart ache. He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "I'm sorry for what happened. No one should speak to you like that." Amara's eyes stung, but she forced a smile. "It's nothing new, sir," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I'm used to it." Ethan's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger crossing his face. "You shouldn't have to be," he said, his tone fierce yet tender. He reached out, his fingers brushing a tear from her cheek, the touch so gentle it stole her breath. For a moment they were suspended, the world narrowing to the space between them. His hand lingered, his green eyes searching hers, and she felt the pull of something dangerous, something unstoppable. She pulled back, her heart racing. "I can't," she whispered, standing abruptly. We can't." She turned to flee, but Ethan's voice stopped her. "Amara," he said, her name a quiet plea. "I don't want to hurt you, but I can't stop seeing you." Her breath hitched, her body trembling as she forced herself to walk away, her footsteps echoing in the quiet garden. As she returned to the mansion, Amara's eyes caught a glint in the hallway. A small wooden box, the same one she'd seen Ethan hide after his orphanage visit. It sat on a table, forgotten in the gala's chaos. Curiosity burned, and she glanced around before lifting the lid. Inside was a delicate antique necklace, its pendant shimmering with an emerald that matched Ethan's eyes. A note tucked beneath it read, "For the promise I couldn't keep." Her heart skipped. What promise? And why did it feel like this secret was tied to the man who was unraveling her world? Amara closed the box, her mind a tangle of fear and longing. Ethan's defense, his touch, his words, they were a fire she couldn't escape. The mansion's walls seemed to pulse with secrets, and as she slipped back to her duties, she knew one truth. Ethan Caldwell wasn't just her employer anymore. He was a mystery, a danger, and the one person who made her feel truly seen. The Caldwell mansion lay quiet under a silver veil of moonlight, its towering silhouette softened by the night's embrace. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of roses from the sprawling gardens below. Amara Jones moved through the servants' quarters, her radiant brown skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Her long black hair swept into its familiar low bun, the silver clip catching a stray beam like a star. Her heart was a storm, stirred by the memory of Ethan Caldwell's touch in the garden, his fingers brushing her tear-streaked cheek, his voice a low vow that no one should hurt her. She'd fled from him, from the pull of his gaze, but the weight of his presence clung to her like a second skin. She was a maid, bound by duty in the stark divide of their worlds. Yet her heart refused to obey the rules. That morning, Amara had been tasked with delivering supplies to the local orphanage, a place Ethan frequented with a warmth that puzzled her. As she handed out blankets to the children, she noticed a group of them struggling to fold paper into simple shapes for a craft project. Without hesitation, she knelt beside them, her gentle voice guiding their small hands. "Like this," she said, her smile bright as she shaped a paper flower, her patience unwavering despite her long shift. The children giggled, their faces lighting up, and Amara laughed with them, unaware of Ethan watching from the doorway. His green eyes, usually so guarded, softened as he took in her kindness, her ease with the children mirroring his own. She was a beacon in a world he'd long found cold, and the sight of her, selfless, radiant, tightened something in his chest. Now, as midnight cloaked the mansion, Amara sought solace in the garden. The gala's chaos, the businessman's cruelty, and Ethan's fierce defense had left her restless, her mind a tangle of fear and longing. She wrapped a thin shawl around her shoulders, her slippers whispering against the stone path, as she wandered toward a secluded bench near the fountain. The water's soft ripple mingled with the night's quiet, and she sat, hugging herself against the cool air. The moonlight bathed her in silver, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the vulnerability in her eyes. She wanted to forget Ethan's words, his touch, but they burned within her, a flame she couldn't extinguish. A rustle broke her reverie, and her breath caught as she sensed him before she saw him. Ethan Caldwell stood beneath a stone arch, his tall frame silhouetted against the moonlit roses. He wore a simple black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his dark hair slightly tousled as if he'd run his hands through it too many times. His green eyes locked on hers, intense and unyielding, and for a moment the world held its breath. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, his voice low, carrying a weight that made her pulse race. "It's late." Amara stood, her shawl slipping slightly, her voice trembling but firm. "I couldn't sleep, Mr. Caldwell. I'll go back now." She turned, but his voice stopped her, sharp yet soft, like a command wrapped in a plea. "Amara!" Her name on his lips was a tether, pulling her back. She faced him, her heart pounding as he stepped closer, the gravel crunching under his shoes. The moonlight carved shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the storm in his eyes. "Why do you keep running from me?" he asked, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't place. "Do you think I don't notice?" He was close now, close enough that she could smell the faint cedar of his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from him. Her throat tightened, her hands clutching her shawl like armor. "You're my employer, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's improper." The word felt hollow, a weak defense against the truth pulsing between them. Ethan's lips curved into a half-smile, tinged with something almost bitter. "Improper," he echoed, stepping closer still, until only a breath separated them. "Is that what you're afraid of? Or is it this?" His hand rose, hesitating, then brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, but it sent a shiver through her, electric and overwhelming. Her eyes met his and she saw it, the same longing that mirrored her own, raw and unguarded. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking, "because you make me feel things I shouldn't." The confession slipped out, a fragile truth laid bare. Ethan's gaze softened, his hand lingering near her face, his thumb tracing the air as if fighting the urge to touch her again. "You think I don't feel it too?" he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Every time I see you, with the children today, with Mary, with Tom, you're like a light I can't look away from. I've tried, Amara. God knows I've tried." Her breath hitched, her heart a wild drumbeat. The moonlight seemed to shrink the world to just them, the fountain's murmur a faint echo of their racing pulses. She wanted to step back, to run, but her feet were rooted, her body betraying her mind. "You don't understand," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I'm just a maid. Your world, it'll tear me apart." Ethan's jaw clenched, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "My world," he said, his voice thick with frustration, "is nothing without someone like you in it." His hand dropped, his fingers curling into a fist as if to restrain himself. "But if I let this happen, if I let myself—" He trailed off, his eyes burning into hers, and she felt the weight of his unspoken words. A promise, a danger, a confession. Amara's chest heaved, her shawl slipping further as she took a shaky step back. "I can't," she said, her voice fragile but resolute. "Not when it could break me." She turned, her slippers soft against the gravel, and fled toward the mansion, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and yearning. Ethan didn't follow, but his gaze lingered, heavy and unyielding, as her silhouette vanished into the shadows. Alone he stood by the fountain, his hands clenched, the moonlight revealing the torment in his eyes. Earlier that day, he'd overheard a staff member mention a call about the orphanage, a debt from his past tied to the necklace Amara had glimpsed. He'd meant to keep it hidden, but her presence was unraveling his carefully guarded secrets. Amara, meanwhile, reached her room, her breath ragged as she leaned against the door. His words echoed in her mind, a dangerous melody she couldn't silence. The mansion, with its opulent walls and hidden truths, felt alive with the tension between them, a spark waiting to ignite. The Caldwell mansion stood hushed in the late evening, its grand halls cloaked in a stillness that felt alive with secrets. The scent of lemon polish lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of a distant clock. Amara Jones moved through the kitchen, her radiant brown skin catching the soft glow of a single overhead light. Her long black hair, secured in its low bun with the delicate silver clip, swayed as she scrubbed a counter, her movements automatic but her mind far away. The memory of Ethan Caldwell's words under the moonlight, his confession, his touch, burned in her chest like a coal that refused to cool. She was a maid, a nobody in his world of wealth and power, yet his gaze had stripped her bare, seeing her as no one else had. Her heart warred with her reason, each beat a reminder of the danger she courted by feeling anything at all. Earlier that day, Amara had been outside, unloading supplies from a delivery truck, when she noticed the driver, a young man soaked from an unexpected drizzle, shivering as he worked. Without a thought, she'd handed him her own umbrella, insisting he take it despite his protests. "You'll catch a cold," she'd said, her voice gentle but firm, her smile warm. She'd walked back to the mansion under the rain, her uniform clinging to her skin, unaware that Ethan had watched from an upstairs window. His green eyes, usually so guarded, had softened at her selflessness, her quiet kindness a stark contrast to the calculated world he navigated. The sight of her, drenched but uncomplaining, had stirred something fierce in him, a need to protect her, to claim her, that he could no longer ignore. Now, as Amara worked alone in the kitchen, the mansion felt too quiet, the silence pressing against her like a living thing. She was wiping down the last of the counters when the door creaked open, and her breath caught. Ethan Caldwell stepped inside, his presence filling the room like a storm. He wore a fitted black suit, his tie loosened, his dark hair slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it. His green eyes locked on hers, intense and unyielding, and for a moment, the world shrank to the space between them. "Still awake?" he asked, his voice low, rough with an edge that made her pulse race. Amara's hands stilled, clutching the cloth tightly. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," she murmured, her eyes dropping to the counter. "Just finishing up." Her voice trembled, betraying the storm within her. She wanted to flee, to hide from the pull of his gaze, but her feet refused to move. Ethan stepped closer, his polished shoes clicking against the tiles, each step deliberate. "You're avoiding me again," he said, his tone soft but laced with a challenge. He stopped just inches away, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell the faint cedar of his cologne. Her heart pounded, her fingers twisting the cloth. "I'm not," she began, but the lie died on her lips. His gaze was too piercing, stripping away her defenses. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and the intensity there stole her breath. "You make it hard to breathe, Mr. Caldwell," she whispered, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. His jaw tightened, a flicker of something raw, desire, torment, crossing his face. "Ethan," he corrected, his voice a low growl. He stepped closer, closing the distance, his hand reaching for hers. His fingers curled around her wrist, gentle but firm, pulling her toward a shadowed corner of the kitchen. "I can't stop thinking about you, Amara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every time I see you, helping that driver, teaching the children, giving what little you have, you unravel me." His words were a confession, raw and unguarded, and they set her heart ablaze. Her breath hitched, her body trembling as he drew her closer. The cloth slipped from her hands, forgotten on the floor. "We can't," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. His hand slid to her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin, sending shivers down her spine. "Tell me you don't feel it," he said, his eyes burning into hers. "Tell me, and I'll walk away." But she couldn't. The truth was a fire in her veins, undeniable and consuming. Before she could speak, he leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both fierce and tender. It was a spark igniting a blaze, their worlds colliding in a rush of heat and longing. Amara's hands found his chest, her fingers curling into his shirt as she melted into him, the taste of him overwhelming her senses. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, as if he could fuse their souls together. For a moment, nothing else existed. No mansion, no rules, no divide. A sudden clatter broke the spell, a tray knocked over by a passing staff member in the hallway. Amara pulled back, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with panic. I can't," she stammered, stepping out of his arms. Her heart pounded, guilt and fear crashing over her like a wave. She was a maid and he was her employer. This was madness. She turned, fleeing toward the servants' quarters, her footsteps echoing in the silent kitchen. Ethan didn't follow, but his voice reached her, soft and resolute. "I'll wait for you, Amara, however long it takes." She didn't stop, didn't look back, but his words burned into her, a promise she wasn't sure she could escape. She reached her room, slamming the door behind her body trembling as she leaned against it. Her fingers touched her lips, still warm from his kiss, and tears pricked her eyes. "What have I done?" she whispered, her heart torn between desire and duty. In the kitchen, Ethan stood alone, his hands clenched, his breath uneven. The memory of her touch, her taste, seared through him. Earlier that day, he'd found an old journal in the library, its pages detailing a promise he'd made to his late sister, a vow tied to the antique necklace Amara had glimpsed. It was a secret he'd kept buried, but her presence was pulling it to the surface, just as she was pulling him apart. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes fixed on the spot where she'd stood. "Amara," he murmured, her name a prayer and a curse. Amara, in her small room, stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying the kiss, his words, the fire in his eyes. She'd found the journal too, tucked behind a shelf, its words hinting at Ethan's loss. A sister, a promise, a debt unpaid. It explained the necklace, the orphanage, the weight he carried, but it didn't explain why her heart ached for a man she could never have. The mansion, with its opulent walls and hidden truths, felt like a cage, trapping them both in a dance they couldn't stop. The Caldwell mansion blazed with light, its grand ballroom transformed into a glittering spectacle for Ethan Caldwell's annual Investors Gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over tables draped in silk, where the elite of the city mingled, their laughter sharp and their gazes sharper. Amara Jones moved through the crowd, a quiet shadow in her crisp maid's uniform, her radiant brown skin catching the soft light. Her long black hair swept into a low bun, the silver clip glinting like a secret. Her heart was a battlefield, torn between the memory of Ethan's kiss in the kitchen, fierce, forbidden, and unforgettable, and the stark reality of their worlds. She was a maid, he a billionaire, and the chasm between them felt wider than ever under the weight of 100 judging eyes. That morning, Amara had been in the servants' quarters, counting her modest wages, when she overheard a staff member mention the orphanage's struggling heating system. Without hesitation, she slipped her entire paycheck into the charity box by the kitchen, her fingers lingering on the envelope as if parting with a piece of herself. She lived frugally, saving every penny for her family, yet the children's needs felt greater. She didn't see Ethan pause in the hallway, his green eyes catching her selfless act. The sight of her sacrifice, so quiet and unassuming, tightened his chest. Her kindness was a flame that burned through his carefully guarded walls. Now, as Amara balanced a tray of champagne flutes, her hands trembled with the weight of her decision. The kiss had changed everything, awakening a longing she couldn't suppress. Yet the fear of losing herself, of losing her place, gnawed at her. She'd resolved to face her feelings tonight, to confront the pull of Ethan's gaze, or sever it forever. The ballroom buzzed with chatter, but her eyes found him at its center, his tailored black suit accentuating his broad shoulders, his dark hair catching the light. He moved with effortless charm, his smile disarming investors, but his gaze kept drifting to her, a silent tether that made her pulse race. As she passed his table, a woman in a glittering gown sneered, her voice low but cutting. "The help shouldn't be so noticeable," she murmured to her companion, her eyes raking over Amara with disdain. Amara's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high, her tray steady. Ethan's head snapped up, his jaw tightening as he caught the remark. The room seemed to still as he rose, his presence commanding silence. "Miss Jones," he said, his voice clear, carrying across the ballroom. "A moment, please." Amara froze, her heart pounding as all eyes turned to her. She approached, her steps hesitant, the tray trembling slightly. Ethan's green eyes locked on hers, fierce and unwavering. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone calm but resolute, "I want to introduce someone who embodies the spirit of tonight's cause." He extended a hand, and Amara, stunned, set down her tray and took it, his touch warm and steady. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but Ethan's gaze never left her. Amara Jones has given more to the orphanage than most of you ever will, he said, his voice rising. She gives not for recognition, but because it's right. He reached into his pocket, producing the small wooden box Amara had glimpsed before. Her breath caught as he opened it, revealing the antique emerald necklace, its pendant shimmering in the chandelier's glow. This, he said, his voice softening, belonged to my sister who grew up in that orphanage. I promised her I'd use my wealth to protect it, to honor her memory. His eyes met Amara's, raw with vulnerability. But tonight, it's more than a promise. It's a vow for our future. The room erupted in murmurs, some shocked, others scornful, but Ethan ignored them. He stepped closer, his hands gentle as he clasped the necklace around Amara's neck, the emerald resting against her skin like a piece of his heart. This isn't just hers anymore, he said, his voice low, meant only for her. It's yours, a promise that you're not alone in this. Amara's eyes glistened, her fingers brushing the pendant, her heart swelling with a mix of fear and hope. The crowd's whispers grew louder, but Ethan's gaze held her steady, a lighthouse in the storm. A man in a pinstripe suit scoffed, his voice cutting through the tension. Really, Caldwell? A maid? The word dripped with contempt, but Ethan's smile was cold, unyielding. Yes, he said, his arm sliding around Amara's waist, pulling her close. A woman who's shown me what it means to be human. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Amara's breath hitched, her body trembling against his. But his touch grounded her, a silent vow that he wouldn't let go. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. Ethan, they'll tear us apart. His jaw clenched, but his eyes burned with defiance. Let them try, he murmured, his thumb brushing her cheek. I've built empires. I can build a world for us. The promise was reckless, impossible, yet it set her soul alight. She nodded, tears spilling over, and for the first time, she let herself believe. In the weeks that followed, Ethan and Amara faced the world's judgment head-on. Gossip columns buzzed, investors whispered, but Ethan stood firm, his hand in hers. Together, they launched a foundation for the orphanage, Amara's compassion guiding its mission, her voice as vital as his wealth. The mansion, once a cold monument to power, echoed with laughter. Their laughter, shared in stolen moments by the garden fountain, in quiet evenings planning a future that defied the odds. Amara, once a shadow in the mansion's halls, became its heart, her courage and kindness illuminating Ethan's world. He, in turn, showed her a love that saw no barriers, a love that burned brighter than the chandelier's glow. The necklace, a symbol of his sister's memory, now carried their shared promise, a life built on truth, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond. As they stood together, hand in hand, the world's whispers faded, drowned by the steady rhythm of their hearts, beating as one. The journey of Amara and Ethan in Black Maid panics at Cockroach runs into Billionaire's bath. Fate and secrets collide is more than a tale of forbidden love. It's a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. Their story reminds us that love can bridge even the widest divides, inspiring us to look beyond status and embrace the connections that make us truly human. What did their journey stir in you? Did Amara's selflessness or Ethan's vulnerability resonate with your own experiences? Share your thoughts and feelings in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story touched your heart. Thank you for joining us on this emotional ride, and we can't wait to meet you again for another tale of passion and triumph.